Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 1992 event story, The Death of Superman. It's hard to believe that it has been 30 years since this story came out. Happy 30th anniversary, Soups, of your death. 30th death anniversary. Yeah, that. After first appearing in 1938, Superman went on to be one of the most recognized, popular, and important cultural icons of all American history, and that's not an exaggeration. After 54 years of mooning over his love interest, Lois Lane, the two were finally set to get married at the end of 1992. The creative teams on the various Superman titles at the time, which included Superman Man of Steel, Action Comics, Adventures of Superman, and Simply Superman, all got together for a big weekend of planning out an entire year's worth of stories around the marriage. Only there was one itsy bitsy little problem: TV. The television show Superman, The New Adventures of Lois and Clark had set itself up with a primary focus on the love story between Superman and Lois, as you could probably guess from the name. And the two characters were also going to get married in the TV show, and apparently the showrunners didn't want the comic book Lois and Clark getting married before the TV show Lois and Clark. So begrudgingly, the creative teams got back together, scrapped everything they had come up with for the year, and worked out a way to delay the wedding for another year. So there might have been some bitterness in the air when they decided that the best way to do that was to simply kill Superman. And, you know, given how comics usually go, I'm a little surprised they didn't go with killing Lois, but, you know, victorious? And just how exactly did they plan to do away with the Man of Steel? Well, let's find out and take this away. The comic opens on several repeating pages of a mysterious fist punching its way through a steel door. Each of these pages were the last page on each of the 4 running series in the issue for those titles preceding the ones actually collected here. Yeah. Let me rephrase that. This collection starts with Man of Steel number 18, Superman number 74, Adventures of Superman 497, and Action Comics 684. But these 4 pages that start this collection come from Man of Steel number 17, Superman number 73, Adventures of Superman number 496, and Action Comics number 683. And are the only pages from each of those issues in this collection, because they're really the only relevant bit. But that doesn't stop each version I found of the collected edition from claiming that they collect those issues. A bit misleading there, DC, but I suppose technically accurate. Eventually, the giant mysterious figure behind that mysterious fist busts his way out from deep in the earth, where he seemed to have been buried for reasons unknown. In fact, we won't really know anything about who or what this guy is for a pretty good amount of time after this. But since I might one day cover some of the comics that do explain him more, that probably will be all I say about who he is for right now. Cause right now, this mofo doesn't even have a name. We barely know anything about him except that he's strong enough to punch through some unknown metal and miles of earth and dirt, and that he indiscriminately mows down trees. Clearly the most evil of souls. Actually, then he goes and needlessly crushes a bird in his hand and snaps the neck of a deer for no damn reason at all. You know, I take it back. Screw this asshole. By the end of the issue, he'll have graduated to attacking human beings when he comes across a bridge and tears through the cars, leaving an ever-increasing trail of destruction in his wake. Or at least, so they'll pretty much tell us. Because while there will be a lot of suggestion about the devastation caused in this story, do remember that this comic was still under the ruling of the Comics Code Authority. And they still definitely restricted depictions of the kinds of things that would make the reader really feel just how dangerous and destructive this still largely unknown creature is. To help build the sense of destruction, the heroes in the story will always be a step behind this creature, either just following along behind his trail of destruction, trying to catch up to him, or just in some way cleaning up his mess. Which is why the first heroes to show up are the Justice League America, and initially they're just helping out with the accidents at the collapsed bridge. And yeah, that's right, Soups is not the first to meet our primary villain of this story, and that's very intentional. I'll talk a little bit about why later, but the in-story reason is that he's busy being interviewed on Cat Grant's show, which is being filmed at a high school for some reason. I don't know if there's an in-universe reason that this is supposed to make sense, but I'm sure the real reason is just because they really wanted to have a chance for a bunch of teenage boys, aka what DC believes their primary audience to be, to ask Superman a bunch of questions. A bunch of really ridiculous questions. And I love these questions. They're like an internet comment section from 3 years before AOL was widely available, from nearly a decade and a half before Twitter was invented. Hard-hitting questions like, is that fire chick hot? Yeah, great question, dude. And yeah, of course she's hot. Her name is Fire. Don't you know how temperature works? What are they teaching kids these days? Or questions like, why did the Green Lantern Corps kick Guy Gardner out? Because DC's editors rightly determined that Guy was an asshat? Duh. I just have no doubt that every single one of these questions was pulled from letters sent to the Superman letter pages, and I love that. Anyway, that's just side stuff. Let's talk about the JLA. At this point, the team had dropped the "of" in their name, as some part of changing over from Justice League International to being just focused on America. And many of the team members were the same from the JLI days. You had Blue Beetle number 2, Ted Kord, a sort of poor man's Batman with more personality, and Ted's bestest buddy, Booster Gold, the time traveler who came back into the past in the hopes that his future technology could make him a superhero. Neither of those guys exactly seeming like JLA material, but, you know, it was the 90s. Also best buds are the female Fire and Ice duo. Their powers you can probably guess. Just a hint, it might have something to do with what their names are. There's also Maxima, probably the heaviest hitter of the group outside of Superman himself. Maxima was an alien queen of the planet Almerac who was introduced primarily as one of the many nuisance villains for Superman, so not really a full villain, just more intended to be annoying. She originally wanted to take Superman as a mate because she saw him as the only worthy male in the universe, but thankfully she was largely developed past that simple concept and eventually earned her place among the members of the Justice League. There's also Guy Gardner, who I've certainly talked about a lot this year. At this point in time, he had Sinestro's yellow power ring instead of his usual green ring, which is a long story that I'm not going into right now, but that did make him essentially the first member of the Sinestro Corps, though such a thing would not actually exist for about another decade. Last on the team is this guy named Bloodwind, with a Y instead of an I so that it's extra cool. He's actually the descendant of slaves who were treated so bad during their time enslaved they resorted to making a magical gem to get revenge on their slave owner. Yeah, it's quite a story. At this point though, he's actually the Martian Manhunter in disguise as Bloodwind for complicated reasons I also won't go into right now. But Blue Beetle is suspicious of him and does realize who Bloodwind is very briefly during this story, but doesn't get the chance to announce it to the reader. Because after helping with the survivors at the collapsed bridge, the JLA chases after the mysterious attacker in the Beetlemobile. Okay, it's actually just called the Bug, but I'll call it what I want, cause it's my channel. The Bugmobile gets speared by a tree thrown by the monster in its continuing desire to just generally cause destruction, bringing the JLA into conflict with the creature for the first time, which pretty much is just the monster guy beating the crap out of the JLA in a matter of seconds. He smashes in Guy's face, slams Bloodwind into some smokestacks, and Fire gets taken out by what looks like a pebble. I mean, seriously, it looks like the bad guy didn't even know she was there or tried to attack her. It just looks like he accidentally knocked loose some gravel and down she went. Lastly, Blue Beetle gets smashed around until he's just a bloody broken mess. Booster Gold is enraged at the idea of someone doing something like this to his BFF and attacks, only for his attacks to mean nothing to the creature and simply get him punched into near orbit. Luckily for PG though, by this time Superman has finally become aware of what's happening and he stops the 30th Century Man's unplanned flight, at which point Booster gives this creature a name for the very first time: Doomsday. Though, actually, the very first full issue here, Man of Steel number 45, says Doomsday on the cover next to an image of the big guy himself, and the title of that issue is literally Doomsday, so undoubtedly everyone reading these comics was already calling him Doomsday. But in the story, he was just the big guy in the green suit with tubing wrapped around it. Back down on the ground, Ice convinces Maxima to get Blue Beetle to a hospital while she goes to try and slow down Doomsday. The comic then, oddly enough, cuts to a student named Mitchell that we saw during the Superman interview earlier, who's clearly some kinda stand-in for all 90s kids. He wears an unbuttoned plaid overshirt, he rides a skateboard, and he comes from a broken home where he fights with his mom all the time. You know, the usual. He probably listens to that Nirvana shit or whatever and watches that Beavis and Butthead. Nothing but trouble, those kinds, you know what I'm saying? But suddenly, Ice comes flying through his kitchen window and lands on his countertop, not having lasted very long in her fight against Doomsday. Superman finally shows up and full-on takes a punch from Doomy without even flinching. And the comic gives that a moment to have impact on the reader. Because not only does the dialogue tell us how powerful the punch was, this literally makes the first moment that Doomsday has done any kind of movement at all that didn't just annihilate something in his path. But of course, the reader, like Superman, obviously would also expect that Supes could take the punch because, you know, he's Superman and all. What nobody would be expecting is that Doomsday isn't even taken aback by this. He simply reels back and kicks Superman in the gut, knocking him through the pimply teen's house like he was one of the other chumps in the JLA that he's been fighting up until now. I'm sorry guys, I didn't mean it, you're not chumps. Mitchell's house quickly becomes the battleground between Doomsday and Supes, but it's more like a bomb going off than an actual fight. Especially after the remaining members of the League show up to help Supes and they all attempt to combine their powers to form Captain Planet. I mean to stop Doomsday. Even Guy Gardner is there to help out, and he can't even see after Doomsday left his face a bruised and swollen mess. But all they really achieve is stripping him of his green outfit, finally freeing the creature's other arm. Because yeah, everything Doomsday has done up to this point has been with his right arm literally tied behind his back. Cause he's just that freaking strong. Doomsday continues to just leave everything in ruins around him, beating the crap out of the Justice League again, and then simply moving on, not even particularly interested in fighting Superman, the closest thing he's had so far to an equal. Superman initially wants to just chase after the monster, not wanting it to get away and cause more death. But with the JLA incapacitated and Mitchell and his family trapped in the burning ruins of their house, his Boy Scout senses get the better of him and he returns to the now literally broken home to help out. This gives Maxima the time she needs to rejoin the fight, and soon her and Superman are working together to take the creature down. But they can't stop getting in each other's way, and the fight ends disastrously when Maxima accidentally sets off an explosion while trying to use a light pole as a baseball bat. Doomsday is fine after the explosion and just leaves right away, but Superman takes a moment to recover. Realizing that there's no one around strong enough to help him in the fight, Superman decides to go it alone from here on out. He tracks Doomsday down to a Lexmark superstore where Doomsday gets distracted by a TV playing an ad for a wrestling event happening in Metropolis, which gets Doomsday for the very first time interested in heading to Metropolis specifically. I knew it. It's all wrestling's fault. Wrestling is to blame for everything. Wrestling brought around Doomsday. Superman attempts to get Doomy away from civilians by knocking him out into the mountains somewhere, but he apparently forgot, quote unquote, that this particular mountain happened to be home to Habitat, a giant construction of metal trees created by Project Cadmus, the secretive but generally good organization that works on DNA and cloning related projects. This little bit of Cadmus cameo is actually relatively important because Cadmus will be coming up a lot over the next several stories. So, you know, just keep that in mind when I cover those stories. Habitat gets wrecked, and once again, Doomsday goes on his merry way, leaving Superman behind and heading now directly toward Metropolis. When Supes catches up to him inside the city, he again tries to get Doomsday away from civilians by flying him up into the atmosphere. But Doomsday manages to wiggle free. He crashes into the underground where there's a bunch of monsters, some essentially rejects from Project Cadmus and others from a recent Warworld invasion. This is actually where the story began, with Superman dealing with a bunch of these guys attempting to attack the Overworld. But I skipped that because it's not really important. I mean, in a sense, it's actually kind of a nice, simple, regular Superman story to kick off the way to his death. Also, the technology in it is just so cute. At one point, Lois left Clark a message on his computer, like she just logged onto his computer and typed something? And like, they trusted that was secure, I guess? Oh, the 90s. Trying to pull Doomsday out of the underground, Supes accidentally sets off another big explosion and ends up losing him again. Supergirl shows up to help out at this point, but is taken down in a single punch, which turns her into mush and then a purple bag of who knows what. Because at this point in time, Supergirl was not Superman's cousin, but instead a shape-shifting alien creature called Matrix that took on Supergirl's identity in tribute to her. And she was also dating Lex Luthor, who was in disguise as his own son, Lex Luthor II. Man, comics are weird. Also, Lex Luthor and Supergirl? That's super gross, yo. At this point, some jetpack troopers with laser beams join the fight, but really they're just kind of in the way and end up being little more than target practice for Doomy as he throws Superman into them, also managing to take down a chopper. That's like 3 birds with 1 stone. Well done, Doomsday. Good throw. The chopper hit by this was the Daily Planet, with Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen aboard, as I'm sure you would have guessed, as they have of course come to get the up-close exclusives of the fight. Superman gets them to the ground safely, but doesn't have time to get them very far away. He does have time, however, to share a kiss with his soon-to-be bride, with them both knowing it could be the very last one they ever share. Then and there, at the base of the Daily Planet, Superman holds the line, and the two combatants focus entirely on fighting each other for really the first time. Their punches land so heavy that they create shockwaves that break all the glass in the buildings surrounding them. And it goes until they both put their all into one final punch. And you may have noticed by now that I'm putting a lot of full-page shots in here, and that's because that's all this issue is at this point. And that's a very intentional design. This is essentially a 7-part story arc if you include the JLA issue, and the first 3 issues, which mostly didn't feature Superman facing down Doomsday, were all regular comics with regular panel layouts you might expect from any comic of the late 80s or early 90s. But the final 4 issues, as Superman and Doomsday really start to face off, all start a countdown. In Adventures number 497, every single page had exactly 4 panels on it. In Action Comics number 684, every single page had exactly 3 panels on it. In Man of Steel 19, every single page had exactly 2 panels on it. And lastly, here in issue 75 of Superman, every single page is only a single panel. Basically an entire issue of just 1-page shots. It's such a unique and interesting idea for how to approach this event. On the one hand, it does make the comic almost a little silly, as in the last 2 issues here, so much has to happen in only 1 or 2 panels. On the other hand, it really does go a long way to creating that feeling of a countdown, of this being the clock ticking down on the life of Superman, until there's nothing left. It's also such a unique challenge, and I love the way the teams worked within these constraints to really still manage to be creative and come up with unique panel layouts and looks for each page. It could have just been the same panel layout page after page, but the teams instead flexed their muscles and came up with interesting ways of handling this concept. And my favorite example definitely has to be this page as Superman and Doomsday both fall. But instead of just showing that, we actually see the reaction of Jimmy and Lois, with Superman and Doomsday basically a second panel showing in the reflection of Jimmy's camera. It's both cheating and not cheating, and it creates such a memorable image. Comics may be super weird, but man, do I love comics. And from there, the countdown actually continues to even less than one panel per page as we move into 2 pages of double page spreads. Both of them all one image as we see that Doomsday is dead, but so is Superman, dying in the arms of his soon-to-be wife, Lois Lane. And that means it's time for the breakdown. I've seen a lot of negative reviews of this series saying that it was just a cash grab, or that DC was just seeking national attention, and like, yeah, I get it. I mean, this isn't the best written comic I've ever read. The villain is just a mysterious blank slate who is whatever we need him to be to tell the story. And the heroes don't really do much. It's basically 7 issues of people going, "What's that?" and then getting punched in the face and knocked out. Not exactly thrilling. But then again, it also is thrilling, because this was so different from anything else that had happened before. In superhero comics, especially in Marvel and DC comics, the big two, stories saw superheroes triumph over villains every single time. The villains might throw the occasional wrench in the works, but by the end of the issue, heroes were basically always coming out ahead. But this changed that landscape, and kind of permanently. This was 6 issues of heroes failing over and over again. And beyond that, you can't argue that they didn't think a lot about this story, cause they definitely did. They stuck to the diminishing panel gimmick despite knowing how limiting it would be, and they made it work. They made it interesting. They took what was meant to simply delay another story by a year, and they made something actually unique and definitely worth reading out of it, and ended up creating something that would forever change comic books and the kinds of stories that they would tell. And that's why I'm giving this series a recommendation level of very high. While, again, it definitely is not the best comic ever created, it's still such a significant comic that I highly recommend this as a comic almost anyone should read at least once. The collected edition gets 1. Cryptic Cadmus Project logo, which is, you know, fine. Most copies I've seen of this comic contain just the 7 issues plus those 4 additional pages at the beginning. The specific version I used for this review seems to be a newer edition that also contained an entire fake issue of Newstime magazine, complete with fake ads and entire fake articles. It was sort of a Death of Superman companion comic, but the in-universe magazine gimmick gets real old real fast. So like, nice that they include it, I guess, but also not really great enough to award extra points. So I'm leaving my rating where it stands. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Just as advanced warning, I'm probably going to have a weird update schedule this month just because things have been kinda crazy here and I'm doing a lot of things this month. I'm still going to try to get at least 4 videos out, and 5 if I can get another Marvel Zombies video out, but I don't know exactly what's gonna happen, and I'm just hoping you can stick with me through all of it, because I really do appreciate all of your support. And speaking of that, we're so close to getting to 1,000 subscribers, and I really hope that you can help me get there. So if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do that, because it would really help the channel, and it would really help you to make sure that you can be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.